Yo, what's up? This is Eldritch Terror, and today we're going to be talking about Dead by Daylight. The special occasion being their 8th anniversary event starting today. I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at everything that we've endured as a community to get to this point. I've been playing Dead by Daylight for a long time, like I'm sure many of you guys have too. And this game has certainly been through its ups and downs regardless of what side you play on. But for one reason or another, it always has us coming back, doesn't it? But what is Dead by Daylight? Dead by Daylight is an online, asymmetric, multiplayer survival horror video game developed and published by Canadian studio Behavior Interactive. It was initially released on June 14th, 2016, where it would begin its journey to dominate this category of the gaming space. While Dead by Daylight was by no means the first asymmetric survival horror game, it definitely found its own way to refine the formula and make it its own, laying out a structure that so many games would copy moving forward. It's crazy. Even after Dead by Daylight's release, we've seen the likes of Friday the 13th the game, including its own original aspects, as well as Proximity Chat, a Ghostbusters asymmetric horror, an Evil Dead asymmetric horror, Killer Clowns asymmetric horror, Alien, Predator, and enough containing original content with no IPs added to keep your head spinning. There's really no shortage of these games. But stacked against all the creative ideas that people could think of and all of the powerful IPs that money could offer, none of these other games could really just crack the code the way that Dead by Daylight did. And I find this so interesting because Dead by Daylight was never meant to be the game that it is. In Dead by Daylight's original conception, it was just supposed to be a killer chasing some survivors around as they did their objectives and tried to escape. And that's basically what we got. However, one way or another, the developers did not intend for loops to even be a thing. Which is like crazy because in the original version of this game there were literally infinite loops. We'll get more to that later, but this core gameplay mechanic would be the thing that set this whole thing into motion here. It created a unique and interesting playing field where strategies could be built and gave this survival horror a little bit of a arcade kind of feel to it, making it widely accessible and giving survivors a chance to really escape or kind of become the killers themselves. It depends on who's playing. But let's wind back the time machine a little bit here and take a look at the early days of Dead by Daylight. From the current state that Dead by Daylight is in now, if you look back on where this thing started at back in 2016, it is unrecognizable. So besides brand new parts instantly popping gens, and Mori's working on first downs for killers, the original game also came with no endgame collapse, which granted survivors time to just run around, plumage chests, punish the killers, and sabotage hooks, which if I may add, did not used to respawn. But we also had a hatch that was almost always around, which if you were wondering why we have keys that don't really seem to do anything, this is what they used to do. They opened the hatch and your entire team could just escape right in the killer's face. So disrespectful. Exhaustion cooldown recovered while you were running, and borrowed time and decisive strike were two of the most insane things ever conceived by man. Well, until Medal of Man came around, and then later made for this, but you guys already know about that. The original state that the nurse was in was absolutely insane. Face camping used to refer to a killer literally standing directly in front of a killer's face, making it completely impossible to save them. And returning back to my original point about how loops weren't intended to be like this in the game, you may have heard the term infinite to describe a strong loop, but very early in the game's life, some loops were literally infinites because you had two strong loops in close proximity. Fast vault was the only vault, and it was faster than today. Killers vaulted slower. The entity never blocked vaults, and killers didn't get bloodlust. In the really early days, for example, the killer shack had multiple windows, and for some time after release, the cow tree on farm maps had two vaults instead of a vault and pallet, and both windows on the suffocation pit building were open, and what's now a breakable wall there was just a wall. And oh yeah, I'm gonna talk about it. The flashlights. These OG flashlights in Dead by Daylight used to be referred to as insta-blind flashlights, and there's a reason for that, and it's an ugly one. See, flashlights and their add-ons back in the day would actually have properties that would decrease the time needed to stun a killer. You heard me right. They could actually insta-stun the killer with a flashlight. And this is crazy because the flashlights were really put into the game to have more interactivity with the killers. There's a bunch of killers that interact with the flashlight in different ways. You can stun the nurse out of a blink, you can burn the wraith out of his invisibility, you can burn up hag traps with the flashlight, but you could also save your friends, blind the killer at pallets, stuff like that to give yourself a little bit more time, much like you can today. However, today, You need to aim your flashlight up, get good at it, and make sure that your timing is really nice so that you get rewarded for your good gameplay and you get a save out of it or something like that, and maybe a little bit more time. Back then, you could literally, I swear to you, just harass the killer the entire game. You could stun them over and over and over and over again with these flashlights. And yeah, you're using add-ons to make the bulb brighter and the stun time lower, so you're not using batteries, and there was no built to last back then. But because you could stun them so quickly, you could juice so much out of these flashlights. It was crazy. It was such a problem. It was such a problem. And this was back when they really didn't think that the Dead by Daylight devs cared at all about the fan base or like what we wanted. Because people had been complaining about the nurse for a long time at this point. And when people started complaining about the flashlights, they were starting to think that maybe this could be the end of this game's life cycle. At this point in time, the only license that was in the game was Halloween with Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. It wasn't the Fortnite Super Smash Bros. Of horror that it is today. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later, more in specific. And most games' life cycles really aren't that long. Like, it's crazy that we're on year 8 of this thing right now. It's very few select games can hold a player base's attention for that long, for real. I mean, even like Call of Duty has to put something out every year in order to keep people noticing what they're doing. But not Dead by Daylight. They've found a way to constantly update the same game, the same formula, even the graphics, the UI, everything that they have to in order to keep this thing fresh and polished for the consumers. And the first time that that was ever invoked was because of these flashlights. You see, back in 2017, there was a Korean Game Awards show in which they interviewed the director of Dead by Daylight. They asked him about the broken things with the game, such as the nurse and the flashlights, and he had the balls to say this.
Yeah, so when you're at the low levels, killers have a bit of an advantage, and when you get to the high levels, the survivors have a bit of an advantage, but it's a very, very small margin. And something that we're looking at and constantly trying to calibrate.
And then one of the co-hosts had the balls to say this.
They're talking about, like, you know, how good of a player that you would be or how bad you would be. But him, Luxam, was saying that if you were a very skillful, high-tier player, the balance would be a little better. That's what he said.
So they challenged the game director to sit down and just play a public match. Not against them, not against pros, not against anybody that even knows this is happening or that it is him, but just a regular, everyday public match in the game. And it didn't go the way that he thought it was gonna go. My man sat down and proceeded to get dogged out on the main stage by these guys. It's actually crazy. He queues into this game and just gets piled on for about 5.5 minutes. He doesn't get a single kill, he doesn't get a single hook, he doesn't get a single down. And this is the guy that's like, you know, in charge of this whole project here. I obviously don't expect him to be like a pro or anything. He's a busy man. He's running a company. He doesn't have time to play this game all day. That doesn't make any sense. But like, you know, you would expect him to be at least like aware of like what's happening in his game. Even if it's just at higher skill levels, like that stuff needs to be researched too, obviously for fine tuning. But after getting his ass whooped, he promptly went back to the headquarters of Behavior Interactive and told them to remove the time reduction needed to stun people with flashlights. And it happened within a month. I swear to you. This was huge for Dead by Daylight, and it marked the first time that they had actually listened to their community. And because they did that, and because they would follow that trend moving forward, more or less, that is why I believe we're still playing this game today. If we still had broken brand new parts and insta-down Moris, people would not be playing this game right now. I'm telling you, it would be too messed up. Believe it or not, Dead by Daylight actually cares a lot about keeping its player base engaged and healthy. And I don't really think anything showcases that better than how they handle their events year-round. In 2016, they kicked things off with the Christmas Blood Hunt, which wasn't much of an event, but everybody loves some blood points. In 2017, we got the Winter Solstice, the induction of the All Hallows Eve, and the Blighted skins. That summer, we got a Blood Feast, and then we were hit with our very first anniversary. The first anniversary was an event that lasted 6 days, and it was to celebrate Dead by Daylight. Each day of the event introduced a new community-wide challenge at both killers and survivors, where they had to work together to achieve a set goal for challenges. The reward for completing each challenge were 2 cosmetics, one for the killer and one for a survivor, and completing all 5 challenges resulted in a special reward. A blood hunt lasted for the entire event, and the event also added the offerings Escape Cake, Survivor Pudding, and Bloody Party Streamers, all granting an additional 100% bonus blood points in all categories. This was the first introduction of these beautiful bad boys, spawning in the Blood Web. Over the years, we've seen many changes to our events, and even some seemingly very random strange ones, shout out Noam Chomsky. But I really like where we've arrived to nowadays, with these cool little snowmen in our winter events, the additions of firecrackers during the Chinese New Year, the cool mechanics that they've been testing out in the Halloween events lately, and of course, the addition of the Twisted Masquerade. Year to year, we're always finding new ways to update these formulas and make the events interesting. They don't really do the same thing twice, for better or for worse, which leads to some years being more exciting than others, but it's cool. I really like the unique event cosmetics that they give out for these. They always end up being really cool and a great way to flex on your friends that weren't playing during that time, or a few years down the line to show newbies just how long you've been at this. And nowadays, we're starting to get like actual game mode events, which is really cool. I'm glad that they're finally testing things out, because we've been playing the same game type for 8 years straight, man. And it does get a little old sometimes. It causes people to need to take breaks from this game. The additions of these new little game modes does a lot more than just having challenges to go for every match, in terms of holding player retention and keeping people very interested. You know, it's crazy to think about when the game first released, there was no IP killers at all involved in this thing. It was all originals, and people really liked that. For a little bit, they liked it. Between the lack of noticeable names in the game and all the BS that killers and survivors were having to put up with, when games like Friday the 13th were dropping, using Jason Voorhees as the killer with like prox chat and all that stuff, Dead by Daylight needed a way to keep their players interested. So they began their voyeur into IP collecting with none other than Michael Myers and Halloween. Some would say the greatest of all time, but others would say not nearly enough, because after Michael, we would see the introductions of so many legendary killers and movies to be added to this thing. Survivors too. We even broke the mold eventually and got Nicolas Cage the actor instead of any of his characters. It's pretty cool. But through its conquest to become the Fortnite of horror, Dead by Daylight hasn't forgotten its roots, and still manages to provide us with unique killers on a monthly basis. We've seen the likes of Leatherface, Freddy Krueger, Saw, Ghostface, the Demogorgon, Pyramid Head, Nemesis, Pinhead, the Girl from The Ring, Wesker from Resident Evil 5, the Xenomorph, my little man Chuck, and motherfucking Vecna from Dungeons and Dragons. Are you kidding me? Some people might not think he belongs on this list, but don't worry, I got a video on that coming soon. And we can't forget these killers' counterparts in Laurie Strode, Ash Williams, Nancy and Steve of Stranger Things, Cheryl Mason, Jill, Leon, Ada, and Rebecca Chambers of Resident Evil, Ellen Ripley, Alan Wake, Nicolas Cage, and old man Bill Overbeck from the Left 4 Dead games. I mean, this is really an all-star roster for horror fans. There's something for everybody here, and you're gonna find something that you can enjoy. Survivors are all kind of just like skins with little perks that you can collect and paste on everybody, but killers are a little bit more specific in their powers. There's nothing more disappointing than finding out that you suck at your favorite killer. With a little bit of time and practice put into it, I'm sure you can get that guy down. Maybe, I don't know. Michael Myers is pretty hard to play nowadays, unless you got the right map and the right perk setup. Jump scare Michael is always a good time. I'm telling you that right now. With all of these characters constantly being added to the game, and each of them coming with 3 of their own unique perks that could be swapped around on different people, obviously throughout the years we ran into many complications. But as I've stated earlier, behavior has addressed almost all of those, and the game is in a really healthy state now. There was a point in time where I myself, I believe around year 6, completely stopped playing for about 2 years. And when I picked the game back up, after it had had all of its UI and graphical overhauls done to it, all of the perks had been changed, all of the killers had been adjusted, it felt like Dead by Daylight 2. I was so pleasantly surprised by this. And if you were in my same boots, you were somebody who used to have love for the game, but just got it beaten out of you by the balancing, then I strongly recommend trying it out again, because they're kind of there now. The community is still toxic, but arguably less toxic now that you can't click flashlights back and forth so fast, and killers can't face camp because you can just pull yourself off. Borrowed time is base kit, and the nurse has been fixed up heavily. From both sides, like she's better to play against as a survivor, and she's better to play as a killer. She doesn't get like stuck in walls as much anymore. I'm personally really enjoying playing Dead by Daylight. This year's anniversary event is titled the Twisted Masquerade of 2024, and it is the 3rd iteration of this type of event. It's scheduled to start today, the 13th of June 2024, and it'll come with a few gameplay changes. A character known as Trix, also known as Jezebel, the host of the Twisted Masquerade herself, will be appearing in-game as an NPC in Trials. There'll be the usual event-themed loading screens, and event-themed props like generators, hooks, lockers, and decorative golden marionettes floating above the ground. We'll see the return of all of our favorite event-themed items like Masquerade flashlights, medkits, and toolboxes. And this year's event-themed offering is the Screech Cobbler. The Masquerade pillar mechanic will be back, holding invitation scrolls and twisted skills. There will also be a Bag of Tricks mechanic, event-themed mystery boxes, and Father Campbell's chapel will be dressed up, receiving a unique makeover inside the chapel to celebrate the event. This year, the Twisted Masquerade event will be delegated to its own separate queue, akin to modifiers that were introduced earlier this year. This allows players not wishing to participate in the event activities to continue playing regular trials. Only Twisted Masquerade trials will feature gameplay mechanic changes. All of these event trials will introduce a new mechanic called the Bag of Tricks. This bag is not a physical interactive object, but rather an overreaching mechanic that triggers tricks, which imbue players with various special effects and can temporarily modify the gameplay objectives. The first trick is always activated at the start of the trial. Subsequent tricks are activated whenever two party events occur, like a generator being completed or a survivor being put on a hook for a first time. The Bag of Tricks will also be disabled during the endgame collapse. So what is the Bag of Tricks? Well, it's literally a mixed bag, granting both good and bad effects to all players in the trial, as well as a possibly neutral one. Things you can pull include You're Invited, granting 1 token towards the twisted skills to all players. Move It or Lose It, granting 30% haste status effects for 60 seconds to all players. A Party Totem, where all dull totems are converted to anniversary totems, glowing in a festive blue and gold tint. Successfully channeling an anniversary totem applies the following effects to the player. It grants you bonus blood points, you get a 30% haste status effect for 5 seconds, and it reveals your aura to the opposing side for 5 seconds. Failing to channel an anniversary totem by interrupting the interaction only grants bonus blood points. An anniversary totem converts back to a dull totem after granting its gift. Another one we can get is the Party Chest. All anniversary chests automatically open in an explosion of festive confetti after 60 seconds, and apply the following effects to all players who are within their aura range at that moment. It causes survivors to scream and suffer from a minus 25% hindered status effect for 4 seconds, and it causes the killer to be stunned in its place. Opening an anniversary chest before the trick expires guarantees a random anniversary item. There's a neutral option where nothing happens, you get tricks, and negative options include No Invite for You, removing 1 token from the twisted skills of all players. Peekaboo reveals all players' auras for 8 seconds. Heal You, Expose You, causing all survivors to be healed by 1 health state, or be mended when suffering deep wound, but then simultaneously causes them to become exposed for 30 seconds. And wait, where? This suppresses the tear radius of the killer and the creation of scratch marks of the survivor for the next 30 seconds. Aside from that, we're going to have Masquerade pillars with invitation scrolls as we've seen before. This year behavior is also giving us the chance to unlock new Masquerade masks for the Clown, Doctor, Hag, Plague, Skull Merchant, and Twins, as well as survivor masks for Adam, Kate, Renato, David, Thalia, and Yoon-jin. Obviously, we've been through a lot as the Dead by Daylight community. There's been a lot of monumental ups and catastrophic downs, that's for sure. This is a roller coaster full of pain and hooking and looping right here. But at the end of the day, they still got us coming back, don't they? I'm very excited for the Twisted Masquerade event this year, and I hope that you guys are too. If you enjoyed this video and you think that you have a friend that might like it too, be sure to send it their way. And while you're at it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. Let me know in the comments what you think was the most broken thing that existed back in the day that they've fixed now. Was it a perk? Was it a mechanic? Was it a skin? Was it a killer? Let me know what you thought. And what do you think are some things that could still be adjusted that could maybe make this game better in the long run? Who are some killers and survivors you would love to see come to the game? And what was an asymmetric horror that you really thought might be the DBD killer, but just fell short in the long run? I've been Eldritch Terror, and whether your day's been going good or bad, I hope it gets better.